What if I told you that the worst advice you'll ever receive always sounds like the most reasonable thing to do? Imagine you're facing the fight of your life. Enemies are targeting you, society is collapsing around you, and everyone you trust is telling you to run away and hide. It seems like obvious wisdom, the smart move, the only logical choice for survival. But what if that reasonable advice is actually the one thing that will guarantee your defeat? Right now, millions of people are receiving well-meaning counsel from friends and family to flee from their problems, compromise their values, or abandon their principles to stay safe. Tonight, you're about to discover why King David's response to this universal pressure reveals one of the most counterintuitive truths about courage, faith, and ultimate victory. This isn't just English vocabulary. This is the difference between tactical retreat and strategic surrender. And by the end, you'll understand why sometimes the most dangerous advice comes from people who love you most. David opens Psalm 11 by directly confronting the advice of his well-meaning counselors. I trust in the Lord for protection, so why do you say to me, fly like a bird to the mountains for safety? The phrase, I trust in the Lord, establishes David's fundamental conviction. His confidence isn't based on circumstances, weapons, or human alliances, but on divine protection. When someone trusts completely, they rely entirely on someone else's character and capability. The word protection means safety and security from harm, like having a bodyguard or living in a fortress. David's question, why do you say to me, shows he's addressing specific people who are giving him counsel. The metaphor, fly like a bird, presents flight as instinctive, natural behavior when threatened. When birds sense danger, they don't stay to fight. They immediately take to the air and escape. The phrase to the mountains suggests seeking refuge in remote, inaccessible places where enemies cannot follow. David then quotes his advisor's description of the current threat. The wicked are stringing their bows and fitting their arrows on the bowstrings. They shoot from the shadows at those whose hearts are right. The phrase, stringing their bows, describes preparing weapons for battle in ancient warfare. Archers had to attach bowstrings and prepare their equipment before they could shoot. When someone is fitting their arrows, they're placing ammunition in position for immediate use. This imagery shows that David's enemies aren't just angry, they're making deliberate, systematic preparations for attack. The phrase shoot from the shadows reveals their cowardly tactics. Instead of facing their targets openly, they hide and attack by surprise. When someone shoots from the shadows, they're using stealth and deception rather than honest confrontation. The description, those whose hearts are right, identifies the targets as morally upright people who don't deserve this attack. The counselor's argument intensifies. The foundations of law and order have collapsed. What can the righteous do? The word foundations refers to the basic structures that support everything else, like the foundation of a building that holds up all the floors above it. When foundations collapse, everything built on them becomes unstable and dangerous. The phrase law and order describes organized society with justice and stability. When law and order breaks down, civilization itself is threatened. The rhetorical question, what can the righteous do, implies helplessness and futility. When someone asks, what can you do? In this context, they're suggesting that the situation is hopeless and resistance is pointless. The counselors are essentially arguing that when society collapses, good people have no choice but to flee. But David completely rejects this logic with a powerful declaration. But the Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord still rules from heaven. The word but creates a sharp contrast between human perspective and divine reality. While the counselors see only chaos and collapse, David sees continuing divine authority. The phrase holy temple refers to God's dwelling place, emphasizing both sanctity and stability. When something is holy, it's set apart, pure, and untouchable by earthly corruption. The word temple suggests a permanent structure that cannot be shaken by human events. The declaration "still rules from heaven" emphasizes continuity despite earthly chaos. Divine government continues unchanged. When someone rules, they exercise authority and maintain order through their power and decisions. David describes God's active surveillance. He watches everyone closely, examining every person on earth. The phrase "watches everyone closely" indicates careful, detailed observation. When someone watches closely, they pay intense attention to details and don't miss anything important. The word "examining" suggests thorough investigation and analysis. When doctors examine patients, they look carefully for symptoms and signs that reveal the true condition. The scope every person on earth emphasizes universal divine awareness. No one escapes God's attention or slips below his notice. This teaches us that while human authorities may be corrupt or absent, divine oversight is constant and comprehensive. God's judgment process is explained. The Lord examines both the righteous and the wicked. He hates those who love violence. The word "examines" appears again, emphasizing that God's judgment is based on careful investigation, not superficial impressions. The phrase "both the righteous and the wicked" shows that God's examination is impartial. He doesn't assume anything based on reputation or appearance. Everyone receives the same thorough evaluation. The strong statement, "He hates those who love violence," reveals God's emotional response to cruelty and aggression. When someone hates something, they feel intense displeasure and opposition toward it. The phrase "love violence" describes people whose greatest joy comes from hurting others. They don't just use violence as a tool, but actually enjoy causing pain and destruction. David describes the coming judgment with vivid imagery. He will rain down blazing coals and burning sulfur on the wicked, punishing them with scorching winds. The phrase "rain down" suggests judgment falling from above like a deadly storm. When something rains down, it falls in overwhelming quantities from the sky. Blazing coals are pieces of burning carbon that maintain intense heat. They don't just burn briefly, but continue glowing and causing damage. Burning sulfur refers to a chemical element that burns with an extremely hot, toxic flame and produces choking, poisonous smoke. The phrase "scorching winds" describes air so hot it burns whatever it touches. When something is scorching, it's hot enough to cause immediate damage to skin or other materials. This imagery presents divine judgment as completely overwhelming and inescapable. David concludes with the reason for God's fierce justice. "For the righteous Lord loves justice. The virtuous will see his face." The word "for" explains the motivation behind God's judgment. It's not arbitrary cruelty, but love of justice. When someone loves justice, they're passionate about fairness and moral rightness. The word "righteous" describes someone who always does what's morally correct. The promise that the virtuous will see his face offers the ultimate reward for moral integrity. In ancient cultures, seeing a king's face meant having personal access and relationship with the most powerful person in the realm. When someone sees God's face, they experience intimate relationship and divine approval. The word "virtuous" refers to people who consistently choose moral excellence and character integrity. This short psalm reveals the secret I mentioned at the beginning. Sometimes the most reasonable advice is actually the most dangerous. David's counselors were logical, practical, and concerned for his safety. They correctly identified real threats and offered a survival strategy that would protect his physical life. But David recognized that following their advice would mean abandoning his calling, compromising his principles, and ultimately losing everything that made life worth living. The choice wasn't between safety and danger, but between temporary physical security and eternal spiritual victory. When we face overwhelming opposition and everyone tells us to retreat, compromise, or hide, we must ask ourselves whether we're being offered tactical wisdom or strategic surrender. David chose to stand and fight not because he was foolishly brave, but because he understood that some battles are worth losing your life to win, and some retreats are actually permanent defeats. His trust in divine protection wasn't naive optimism, but calculated faith based on God's character and ultimate justice. Sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is ignore the best human advice and trust in divine wisdom that appears foolish to everyone else.